This is the word of the Lord for the people of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So I have several friends who have had those come to Jesus moments. And this is Peter's come to Jesus moment, isn't it? Where Peter has denied Jesus 3 times. And I've had friends who have come to Jesus after some really bad stuff. Alcoholic who has come to Jesus and confessed Jesus and lives like Jesus wants and is completely changed because of it. One young man was probably the epitome of, what do they call that, fraternity brothers. All of the women that he had slept with would astound, amaze, and probably disgust you. And it disgusted him when he felt like he had been hit by a 2x4 on the head one day and fell down and was immediately converted to Christianity. He'd never been to church before. Or maybe he had been to church before, but he just went the next Sunday and just decided he was Christian. It was an amazing, just complete turnaround for him. And there are people who can tell you stories about themselves that will floor you when you see the places that they have been, sometimes completely dipped in evil. And they come to God with the full intent in their hearts of turning it around. Sometimes they come timidly, wondering if God will even take them back. And we sometimes believe that God won't take us back, but here is Peter saying, without any reservation, Lord, I love you, even though he had denied Jesus 3 times. This is pretty amazing stuff if you think about it. Peter just lays it all out, and Jesus doesn't wag a finger. He says, do you love me? He takes him back in. Now, there's a lot of stories in this text that need to be acknowledged. First, we know that this text directly acknowledges that Peter was executed in a way that is like Jesus. Now, there's other stories that go with this, but this is John acknowledging the death of Peter. And he also contrasts his own understanding of where he was to go with Peter's as well, because Jesus is directly talking about how John may not die that way. So we have to acknowledge that, and this is an interesting portion. And there's a whole other sermon about this, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. And then there's this whole idea that this is where John makes Peter the head of the church, but that's not what John says. That's not the point of this statement. But there are some other lessons to be learned. Jesus asked Peter 3 times if he loves him. This is a direct contradiction to his denial of Jesus 3 times. But why did John choose to write the story this way? He could have just said, and so Jesus asked him 3 times and Peter said yes and everything was okay. What's the deal behind this text? Why does he ask him? Sorry, I sound like I just asked him 3 times. What's the deal with that? Why does he talk about sheep like that? Why does he need to even talk about the sheep? This is about Peter, isn't it? Or is it about Peters? How many of us are Peter? How many of us have denied Jesus? And Jesus says, Peter, to you, Peter, I want you to turn it around. I wonder how many of us are Peter in this text. How many of us think to ourselves, man, you remember that time and I wasn't completely comfortable with those people and they asked if I went to church and I said no. And you kind of get that feeling inside of yourself like, man, I kind of feel kind of anxious about this and I kind of screwed up a little bit, God. And I kind of denied you a little bit. And one of the things that I do in my Sunday school class, or I try to do, is I try to ask, where were you closest to Jesus? And where did you feel far enough away? And sometimes in other settings, not this Sunday school class, somebody says, man, I really feel like I denied Jesus this week because something happened and it upset me. And so we are all Peter. We're intended to read this story as if we are Peter. But I think Jesus wants you to turn it around just like Peter. And I think you should ask yourself on a daily or a weekly basis, have you denied Jesus? Was there a moment in your day when you felt like you have gone too far? Was there even a moment in your week where you felt like, man, I was pretty far from God? And what I think is going on here is that Jesus wants us to turn it around. And that's okay. He doesn't wag his finger. He says, do you love me? Then let's do this other thing. It's like a Montessori school, right? I don't know much about Montessori schools, but my understanding is when a kid gets in trouble, the teacher's supposed to say, well, I want you to stop doing that, not just to stop, but why don't we try doing this instead? And so Jesus is kind of doing that with the disciples. It's like Montessori for disciples, right? Jesus, do you love me? Yes? Then I need you to do this instead. When they finished eating, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And Simon replied, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my lambs. Peter, turn it around. Feed my lambs. Because tonight, 1 in 5 children in the United States is going to go hungry or go to bed wondering if they're going to eat well in the next day. 1 in 5. Every day, 16,000 children die from hunger or hunger-related illnesses. In the next few minutes, a lamb will die. A child that God breathed his life into. And Jesus says, feed my lambs. And Jesus asked the second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Simon replied, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus said to him, take care of my sheep. Peter, turn it around. Take care of my sheep. What does it mean? Take care of my sheep. Clothe them? Shelter them? Yeah, that's not all of it. Care for my sheep. Care. And you've heard me talk about this before, and there are some very biblically thematic things that go with caring, things that happen by nature when you care about something. When you care what you do, you can't help but feel when somebody's in pain, when you care about them. When you see them, you can't help it. You know them, you see them, you care. And if they're in pain, you care about them too. When you care, you don't like to see suffering for those you care about. You can't help but suffer a little with them. And when you care about people, it is in us to automatically try to bear up their burdens. When you care about somebody and you see them walking down the aisle or walking along and they've got like their hands full of groceries and they can't get to something, that you're going to go and help them do it. These are very biblical themes, a very natural thing for us to do. And Jesus says, care for the sheep. On the contrary, there are some very anti-Christian things that happen when you say, I don't care. Did I get the head nod right?
Close enough.
Refugees come over the border and die of thirst in the desert, and I don't care. People are trying to care for God's creation, and they see God tell them to do this. I'm sorry, let me repeat that again. They interpret God telling them that they need to care for creation, and people do this. I don't care. They sound a little bit like Carter. I don't care. I'm on my cheesy boots. Okay, maybe that was for those of you who... We'll try that again later. People don't have access to health insurance. They can't even get into the hospital, and the head bug comes on. I don't care. Jesus says, care for my sheep. And he asked the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was sad that Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? And he replied, Lord, you know everything. You know I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Peter, turn it around. Feed his sheep? Wait a minute. We were just instructed to feed his lambs. Has Jesus suddenly started working for the Department of Redundancy Agency? I don't understand. Why do we have to feed his lambs and his sheep? Maybe we stop thinking we should feed the sheep because the lambs because they grow up. Is that what Jesus meant? Maybe. I think that there are some people out there that think, oh, they're not a kid there anymore. They can fend for themselves. Feed them. Don't have to feed them. Just feed the children. What's the definition of a child in the United States? Anybody under the age of what?
18.
Audience participation loud.
18.
Anybody under the age of 12 is a child? 18 is a child? I'm confused. I know the law is confused because you can't vote until you're 18. You're still a child, but yeah, we can take children and we can stick them in jail with adults. What's the definition of a child? Where do we stop feeding those lambs? Ooh, good question. But I'm not sure that that's what he meant. I think there's more to it than that. I think there's something else going on here. What kind of food should we feed the lambs? What kind of food should we feed the sheep? I know what I like. I like steak. Right? What do you like? What kind of food do you want?
Stone soup. Stone soup.
Stone soup, yeah! All right. What else? Come on, name a food, folks. Favorite food? Pizza? Chicken. I like chicken, all right. What's that? Mexican food? Oh, yeah. Have you ever gone to one of those places where they bring the Italian food where you tear off the bread, and you put it in oil? I like that bread. I got a fondness for the whole grain bread.
You've made us hungry now.
What's that?
You've made us hungry now.
Well, we'll meet the Episcopalians at lunch, I promise. That's a joke. But man does not live on bread alone, as much as we like the stuff. Are we supposed to feed them more than bread? Are we supposed to hear that man does not live by bread alone and go, oh yeah, there's a spiritual thing we're supposed to feed the sheep too. This works. That'll preach. I'm good with that. And we're supposed to feed the sheep some kind of spiritual nourishment. But I have to wonder, can we feed the sheep spiritual bread when we walk around malnourished about it ourselves? Do we have the practices of Christianity that take us deeper with God daily? Something inside of us that says we're practicing Christianity? Or do we simply check church off on a to-do list for Sunday? Do we meditate? Do we explore new ways to pray so that we're constantly growing? Why are we Methodists anyway? What's this whole story about this constant growth stuff that Leslie was always talking about? Do we reach deep into ourselves without fear, without trepidation, and say, God, I'm knocking on that door, I want to know more about you? Or do we go, yep, we got it. We sing our songs and we're gone. Do we know right here in our hearts that we have a spiritual direction that we are growing in? I think we must be these things that Jesus told Peter to do in our community. And we must feed the lambs, engaging our schools in backpack ministry, sneaking that food into their backpacks so they're not embarrassed in front of their peers, so they know they have something to eat tonight or over the weekend when they go home. We must care for the sheep, and we have to care deeply, not muttering words like, I don't care, under our breaths. And we have to go out to the sheep, not expecting that the sheep are going to come here to the barn, and that we have to understand that if a sheep is sick, they're not going to go naturally to the barn, that is not the place that they want to go. They want to curl up in a side corner and die. Can you imagine? Or maybe you've been there. Learning their names of that sheep, coming to care for them as the person that they are, not as the person that they can be, not as a giving unit like some churches call their parishioners. We have 3,000 giving units. That was a shocker for me when I heard that they actually do this. They're not people, they're giving units. Scary. But as the person that they are now, because that's what love is, loving somebody for who they are now, not who for they can be, or who they will be, or who they might do, or what they might do for you. That's not love. That's an investment. Are we offering our sheep spiritual direction, not demanding it of them? You gotta go pray, because you need Jesus. Or are we saying, man, when I go to the labyrinth, it changes my life. When I go to God in prayer, I see something deep and meaningful that gives my life something powerful to talk about. Are we claiming that spiritual direction for ourselves internally? Or are we asking ourselves, how can we pray better so that we can say to other people that I pray deeply and meaningfully in my life? You see, Jesus offered these three things to the church. All of those things that we're talking about, because Jesus understood from the beginning that that's what makes a church. People know in their hearts, if you go out and you ask any atheist what the Christians should be doing, they will tell you feeding children, because in their hearts, they know that that's what Christianity does. Anybody who's agnostic, meaning they don't know who God is, they don't know that they know, which is okay. If they don't know, that's all right. Because that means that they still have a space in their heart for spiritual awareness. And we can answer that question, can we? Because we can feed the sheep. People know they need to eat more than bread. Something in their hearts calls out to them. I think there's sometimes a donut-sized hole. I think people are like donuts. Let me say that a different way. They have a hole in the middle, and it's God-shaped. And they do things to try to fill that hole, and they don't realize that what they need is a spiritual life. And people know that there's more to expect from Peter. So, when we think about Peter in this story, and every time we think about turning it around, do we go to this story with Jesus on our minds? Do we say, oh, I need to be Peter. I need to say, Lord, I love you, and so I will feed your lambs. And so I will care for your sheep. And so I will feed your sheep because I am one of them and I need feeding. And for those of you out there who have identified with Peter, for those of you who are Say, hi, my name is Susan, I'm a Peter. Wait, sorry, Susan. I just picked your name out of the blue. I want you to think about what that means for your spiritual awareness, for the children and the people around you that need your care. So what I want to do for this next song is I'd like to open up the rail, and I'd like for you to come down, and I want you to, if you're a Peter, pray at that rail, or pray in your seat, or just pray every day. Because being a Peter isn't easy. Come on down, or if you'd like to come up to me and talk about a church home, or if you want to see me after, because it kind of makes you feel a little creepy talking about a church home. That'll be all right. But this is the time for those Peters in our hearts to talk